idea, you now have the possibility that you can finally bring these financial means together and, perhaps, put aside something for times of need, which is even your right. Here, I would also like to determine, contrary to the statutory determinations, that the means that are to be received through these teaching courses are not only to be your property at 50% but rather at full extent, because financially, you have a lot to make up for your family, which has truly been living in impoverished conditions up to now. Moreover, the appropriation of 25 Swiss francs per person per month mentioned by me isn't set too high because your work is truly priceless, so it cannot be measured in monetary amounts, etc. Billy says you speak a strong word, Pata, but I still find the price to be too high. Pata says I explained to you that this price determination represents a determination on my part, which you should not deny now. In case of need or inflation, the amount can and should be increased at a later time. Semyaza says sure, that is also my view. Quetzal says I could only align myself with that. Billy says okay, then it shall just be like that. Well, I will ask for 25 Swiss francs. Semyaza says that is good, if only you are as reasonable in other things. Billy says what do you mean by that now? Semyaza says Quetzal will enlighten you about this. It concerns your safety. Quetzal says that is of correctness already months ago. We drew your attention to the fact that all of you should exercise your supervisory function at night in the center, which you have omitted up to now. However, I would urgently like to reiterate this to you and to suggest this task to you again. Your enemies haven't become less, quite the opposite. You know that 5 attempts have already been made to kill you, and the latest incident will not have been the last. It could very well be that already in a short time, an assassination attempt is undertaken again, as various signs point to that. Hence, be very watchful and don't go along without your weapon. It may be that you will be shot at again, however, it is also possible that your vehicle will be used again for an assassination attempt, as this was, indeed, already the case at an earlier time, as you know very well. Sufficient caution is, therefore, appropriate, my friend. Billy says I'll remember that, but you yourself know that we are too few people to set up an effective night watch. Quetzal says that is of correctness, therefore, it would be necessary that more group members reside in the center. In particular, male group members would be of importance. Billy says but who? Pata says we have discussed these things. At the springtime, Engelbert and his family will live in the center, but just one other male person is not sufficient. There would still have to be one more. We have found the only possible solution, which refers to he should finally bear the obligation, draw close to you all, and finally be freed from his treacherous thoughts and actions. Billy says which age do you mean? We have 2 of those. Pata says it is only possible for one of the 2, namely for HS. Billy says you know, however, that he strictly refuses and that he thinks, feels, and acts more and more destructively as well as treacherously toward the group and the mission. Pata says that is well known to me. His refusal, however, isn't based on the senseless grounds that he is not in a position to do so for this or that reason, which are truly no grounds, however. In truth, he doesn't want to do this only because certain things don't appeal to him, which he would then finally have to omit because he would then have to carry out the already long-needed change in himself. He is, however, the only real option that is currently available. He should finally reflect on his obligation and do his duty. That should be clearly stated to him one last time, and he should not resort to excuses again, which cannot be acknowledged because they only represent apparent reasons, which rest in his treacherous attitude. Rightly, which I must say, he should have already been excluded from the group long ago, like also his brother. Billy says then there is still also the problem of accommodation, for which I already have a solution in mind. However, I've worked out a plan as to how we could still create more living space in a cheap way. Patar says then this problem should, indeed, be solved by that. Billy says if the group agrees with it, then yes. Patar says good, then for today, I have discussed everything with you that was to be discussed between us, except that I don't want to get involved further with the negative side of H, for I have said everything necessary in this connection just now. Quetzal says also for my part, I have said what was necessary in this regard. Semyaza says I have nothing further to add, except that you should please be very, very careful because different signs point to the fact that already in a short time something unpleasant will approach you, and at the same time, this unpleasantness will be directed against your life. Billy says well, you probably don't know something more precise about that, otherwise, you would, indeed, say it. I will do my best to be on guard. Farewell then, to all of you, and also pay attention to yourselves. By the way, I am still to give you all dear greetings from everyone, which I shouldn't forget, and indeed in spite of all the whining and fighting among one another. Semyaza says I am very pleased about that. Dear thanks until we meet again, my friend. Billy says bye together. Patar says be watchful and be well disposed towards peace and your health. Quetzal says I will come to you again next week. Until then, pay attention to yourself and farewell. Billy says till we meet again. Quetzal says so now, I will give you our declaration for LC regarding the blank of the center, which you call the Semyaza Silver Star Center. It has arisen through various calculations and evaluations that if the center is to be preserved in its task, this should be imparted in a form of blank, which offers the greatest security. All group members in the existing group were examined and analyzed with respect to this responsible task in all aspects of characters and emotions and the most important foundations of the recognizing and understanding of the task and the teaching. The result yielded that among the existing members of the group, not a single force is to be found who would do justice to this task, which is why we had to move the progeny of the group members into our attention. It has been found that at a later time, blank would have to assume the leadership of the center, as our calculations have yielded this. His initiative will also be decisive in that the task is continued in an administrative form. At his side will be blank, who will be of importance as a representative since he can, with great certainty, never allow himself to be inserted into the military forces, which would be worthless for our task. But also, blank will have to assume an important role in the task area, by what means all blank form a very important connection, which is classified as a mutual blank collaboration. Therefore, it is given, as our calculations yield, that blank is to be used as a later driving and preserving force of blank of the whole center, but at the same time, blank is to be used for the guidance and preservation of the same, which is to be added by us as well-recognized statutes as a foundation. In the right to a say in the guidance and administration of the center, blank is to be included because blank is of decisive importance, who will also receive this if a blank force should fall out by passing away. For the administration of blank, according to earthly laws, the blank should be used, if it should turn out that this would be necessary due to unforeseen circumstances. First and foremost, this duty applies to you, who would have to take on this task. After your demise, blank would be obliged to this task, but blank alone would not be master of this, so blank an assistance is to be added by Engelbert, his wife Maria, Benedette, and by Madeline and Jacobus, who would be able to master this task in a common unit. But this only applies if you had to lay down your task prematurely by passing away, and thus your guidance would be forfeited. This regulation is to be settled and held in writing in an earthly official way by Elsie in the next time, according to which after an unforeseen passing away on her part, the order would take its course. But it should happen that up to the time of her passing, she keeps the administration in her hands, while you should still bear the guidance and the organization, as this was the case up to now. This is our declaration, as we have worked it out through our very exact calculations, and which you are to convey to Elsie as her sole knowledge, after which she can act accordingly. Moreover, it is already Elsie's most inherent will and thought to regulate the blank of the centre in this form. Billy says, and all that is over my head, for I am not and cannot be in agreement with it. I have carried out a look into the future and have found that blank will stray away from the task of the mission in such a sense, and that both blank will go their own ways, so I blank therefore, I am for the fact that we regulate everything differently, and indeed, that we definitively make the center group property, precisely by making everything association property. Quetzal says we will take counsel over your proposal and also consult the High Council. The end.